Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims? Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace with ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Oh, sorry. I was jamming out there to Tombstone Taylor's awesome jam that he created for Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century. I'm Paul Sheehan, and I'm your host today, and I'm doing this one solo. Apparently, the weather is just so good, the rest of the hosts said, no, don't worry about it. There was a scheduling issue. And today I have a wonderful guest that's going to be coming on. He's a returning guest, Justin Vacula. He's very well known in the atheist and skeptic community about doing activism. And we're going to actually talk today about the work that he does and the importance that it plays in our community and how it makes a difference. But before we get to that, I want to kind of give a little bit of background on why we're having Justin on. As you know, the Supreme Court has recently ruled that you can now have prayer, and particularly Christian prayer, in city council meetings. And when the Supreme Court of the United States makes a legal decision that affects people that don't share those values, it's very important to have a discussion on it, and that's what we're doing today. So I want to remind our viewers that supporting this show is absolutely vital. There is not enough atheist voices out there. And I think that's part of how we got into this situation, that we were not a strong enough voice in our country. Apparently, the Supreme Court felt that it could get away with this. And we'll be talking to Justin about that as well. However, there is an opportunity for you to support this show. And I know Carrie, our technical director, will pull up our little check to show you where you can send in donations to this show through Fairfax Public Access. And I just want to remind our viewers that we are trying to expand. We are trying to get involved with atheists. American Atheist is getting ready to open up a new atheist TV channel. We're reaching out to them, trying to get our show rebroadcast on there. We are looking for public access stations around this country to do what they call bicycling in. That's where you basically send a show in that's produced elsewhere. If you live in a community that has a public access station and you want to be a sponsor for this show, we can get you copies, you give it to the station, they're required to air it. However, that costs money. Where does it cost money? It costs money in the duplication process. We have to send you a DVD, there's the cost of the DVD, there's the cost of mailing it. So making financial support to the show allows us to expand this voice that we all care about. It allows us to put people like Justin on air around the country, people like Richard Dawkins, Lawrence Krauss, Dave Silverman, Edwina Rogers, people like Liz Cornwall. These are names and faces that you recognize. This is a great way for you to help get the message out there. There's really no point in just preaching to the choir, excuse the pun. But that's something I think Justin's also going to talk about today, which is the difference between internet activism versus getting out into the real world and doing what really counts. And we're going to come back from our break here in a minute and introduce him. Once again, back to our show. And until we do that, we got some great atheist news for you that is produced by Atheism TV. And Carrie, take it away to the news, please.
In February, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni signed a controversial anti-homosexuality law, also known as the Kill the Gays law, into effect. The law has been toned down somewhat since it was initially proposed, and the controversial death penalty aspect has been called out. However, the law as enacted still criminalizes the promotion of homosexuality and requires citizens to report anyone suspected of being gay to the police. In many cases, convicted homosexuals face life imprisonment. Since then, many in the West, Europe, and South Africa have condemned the law, and in some cases have limited or cut off diplomatic relations with the African country. However, the law does have widespread international support amongst evangelicals, including a group of conservative Anglican archbishops. The Global Anglican Future Conference has released a statement which seems to equate international displeasure over the harsh Uganda law with acts of violence and natural disasters. The Archbishop's statement reads in part, "We are equally concerned for the affected communities in Chile from the recent earthquake, terrorist attacks in Kenya, and the backlash from the international community in Uganda from their new legislation." A new law recently signed by Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta officially legalizes and recognizes polygamous marriages. At the signing, Kenyatta said, "Marriage is a voluntary union of a man and a woman, whether in a monogamous or polygamous union." The bill gives a man the legal right to marry as many women as he chooses with no limitations on number. In an early iteration of the law, first wives were given the right to have a say in all additional wives. However, several male members of Parliament were successful in having that provision stricken. The new law has met with both praise and criticism from religious groups as well as from women's rights advocates. Christian clergy have come out against the new law, while Muslim clergy are singing the law's praises. Women's groups are happy that the law now grants some legal protections for wives in multiple spouse households, but they are upset that the right of refusal is being denied to the first wife. Ironically, nobody seems upset that the new law does not grant women the right to have multiple husbands. During the April meeting of the United Methodist Church's General Council on Finance and Administration in Little Rock, Arkansas, a decision was made by the organization's highest court upholding a recommendation from their board of directors concerning staff benefits for agency employees at church agencies. The church court has determined that offering medical and other benefits to staffers and spouses in same-sex relationships does not violate the organization's Book of Discipline, which prohibits giving United Methodist funds to any gay caucus or group or otherwise use such funds to promote the acceptance of homosexuality. The decision is only applicable in those states where gay marriage has been deemed legal and does not alter their position prohibiting their clergy from officiating in same-sex marriages. The decision is not sitting well with all members of the Methodist clergy. As conservative Methodist pastor the Reverend Tom Lambrecht wrote on his blog, it adopts a policy that contradicts church teaching on the definition of marriage, not only violating the beliefs and values of church members, not to mention Scripture, but creating confusion by sending a mixed message about what United Methodists believe.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait, look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Welcome back, and thank you Atheism TV for that news segment. We would like to go ahead and introduce our guest today, Justin Vacula. Welcome to Road to Reason, Justin. Let's try that again. All right, yeah, we had the audio failure there, but that's okay. So go ahead and say what you just said.
Thank you for having me on.
You're most welcome.
It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. I want to kind of recap. You've been on the show before. I'd like to have you explain a little bit to the audience about your passion of what you do and why you do it, and then I have some questions for you based on that.
Yes, I'm an atheist activist and an activist for the separation of religion and government. I'm the co-organizer and spokesperson of a local organization, the NEPA Free Thought Society, here in northeastern Pennsylvania. I became active with church-state separation issues and atheism in 2009, and ever since, I've been pretty busy here in Pennsylvania.
I would imagine you have been very busy. One of the reasons we have you on is because of what just happened in the Supreme Court. And I know we had some fantastic guests on last week. We had Dave Moscato and Rob Boston. But prior to that, I was talking to the hosts of the show, and I said, you know, these are the guys that are going to go out and they're going to file lawsuits and they're going to write legal briefs. And the problem we're facing right now as a community is that the Supreme Court has made a decision. Now, that doesn't mean that all legal avenues, different ways to bring the challenge back up have been exhausted. What it does mean is that that is a stunning defeat for our side in an area that was extremely important, which was defining the separation of church and state. You seem to take a more cultural approach to fighting this fight. As I was talking to you in our pre-interview, one of the things I loved about Harvey Milk was that he was a gay activist, a gay man, and he went to change the culture before they changed the law. And the way he did that was through nonviolent direct action. And that seems to be the approach that you're taking. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about what it is that you do and how you make a difference in that way.
Right. I get involved in a lot of community outreach, not just blogging or writing or producing YouTube videos, which are great and all, but I get involved in the community, on the ground. I have had open discussions and debates with pastors in their churches, and I've gone to Christian events to dialogue with people in some protests, appearing in newspaper articles, and having an open debate or discussion challenge to those who would be interested in that, whether they be pastors, theologians, or prominent religious members in the community. I find it very important to interact with people in the real world and not just be confined to online spaces.
And you've been doing this recently where you've been going to city council meetings and you have been engaging your city council. I'd like you to talk a little bit about what that looks like in the exchange of dialogue you've had with these people.
Right. I became involved in going to city council meetings in the city of Wilkes-Barre following a banner that the Freedom from Religion Foundation helped me hang on Public Square in Wilkes-Barre in response to the 2013 National Day of Prayer. There was a man who approached council and had said that he found it inappropriate or awkward that a banner would hang on Public Square when council opens its meetings with prayer. So I found that pretty interesting. So I decided to go to council meetings and see what was going on there and voiced my objections to prayer. And following those, sorry about that.
That's why I'm going to let you take a break on that. So you go to these meetings and you basically, tell these folks, hey, I'm not really happy about using our government property and time to promote prayer. What type of response did you get from them? Was this hostile? Was it dismissive? Was there any inclination that any of these people even cared about the position you had?
Right. Well, the first time I went to a council work meeting where they do not allow public comment, I approached the mayor of Wilkes-Barre, Thomas Layton. After a meeting, he was answering questions from reporters and other people interviewing. I asked the mayor a question about prayer. The mayor had walked away, said, "I don't want to go there," and did not even engage, did not even want to talk. And there were some other comments the mayor had. I'll quote him here. He had said at a council meeting, quote, "We live in a free country. Unfortunately, everyone has the rights to say whatever they want to say." This was in response to the Nothing Fails Like Prayer banner. He had also said that the council members were, quote, "people of faith." And in response to someone who objected to the banner hanging, he said, quote, "Sometimes our hands are tied," and this is one of those cases. So the mayor was not very happy about the banner being up and specifically isolated my speech and said that he did not like that speech. So it seems to be some clear favoritism for religious perspectives and antagonistic views toward atheist beliefs.
And you had a banner that you did have put up. Can you talk a little bit about how that you feel that free speech effort may have been infringed upon by that city council?
Right. Yeah, so this was in 2014. More recently, the banner had returned to public square. The National Day of Prayer event came to town once again, and I contacted the Freedom from Religion Foundation, asked them if I could hang the banner again on public square. They agreed, so I went to City Hall, produced the $50 check. I got a receipt from the banner. This was on April 17th. On April 21st, I put out a press release. City Hall agreed that the banner would hang from April 28th to May 5th. May 1st would be the National Day of Prayer, so the banner would come up before the event, hang during the event. The banner then went up 3 days late. City Hall would not return my phone calls, and the event happened on May 1st. The scaffolding structure in Public Square, which houses the banners, had the National Day of Prayer banner in the front in a prominent location where all event attendees can see it. And on the reverse side of the scaffolding was my banner. So instead of city officials placing the banners at equal prominence, mine was unprominently placed on the reverse side of the scaffolding structure.
So it was facing what?
Right. It was away from the event. There's a band shell in the front of the scaffolding structure, an area where people are seated. And on the reverse side of the scaffolding structure, it was very much out of sight, obscured by trees, and unprominently placed. It was a big shame that the city would not grant equal prominence to the banners, that they would allow the National Day of Prayer banner to have more exposure to citizens while my banner was on the back. And interestingly enough, there was another banner that was up that said, "May is Mental Health Month." So that banner was also on the front. I later had a discussion with city officials about why my banner was on the reverse side, and they had claimed that it was on the reverse side because the National Day of Prayer event was happening, so their banner was placed in the front. Well, that really doesn't make sense because the Mental Health Month banner was placed in the front of the scaffolding structure too. So the response from city officials was extremely poor.
So in other words, you're unfortunately free to have whatever opinion you want as long as you tell it to the brick wall.
Apparently so.
Or in this case, the backwards facing scaffolding. And you have filed a Freedom of Information request, and what's the process with that?
Yes, I filed in Pennsylvania. They're called right to know requests or open records requests. You go to City Hall, you fill out some paperwork, you release your name, where you live, a phone number, other contact information, and the government has 5 days to produce the records you request. But they also may invoke a 30-day extension to produce the records. And in this case, they did. They invoked a 30-day extension citing staff shortages. I filed the open records request to find more information about the event that happened, who was responsible for the banners, and not only the National Day of Prayer banner, but also the May is Mental Health Month banner. Because if it is the case that they would get the front of the scaffolding structure for the event, as I said, it wouldn't make sense that the May is Mental Health Month banner would also be there unless the prayer group put it up, but I highly doubt that the prayer group was involved in that. So I filed the open records request to find more information, what the rental included, if they got the front of the scaffolding structure, what was going on. The situation doesn't make much sense, so I wanted to dig deeper, and I'm still waiting on that information.
Well, and one of the things that we'll do here is we'll follow up on that, and when you get the answers, we'll share that with our audience. I want to take a moment, I want to talk a little bit about, when you and I did our pre-interview, we talked about, the internet activism, and there's a lot of problems with that. It doesn't really translate a lot of times into the real world in an effective way. Would you like to take a moment and talk about the difference as you see it with feet on the ground activism versus internet activism? What's effective, what's not? Where would you put your where would you make your investment if this were a business decision?
Right. The internet activism, or say hashtag activism on Twitter, or people blogging, again, while that's all well and good, it's important to try to achieve a result. And just by putting out a tweet with a certain hashtag, you're likely not to shift anything in culture or influence people. It's likely not going to be as effective as actually going out in the community, going to city council meetings, protesting, having debates, having appearances. I understand that the on the ground stuff might not be for everyone. Some people, for whatever reason, want to remain anonymous, and often for good reasons. Some people might not have the personality to be involved with the activism because criticism is often a part of the game, so you have to endure that. Some people might have a hard time dealing with other people. There can be all sorts of reasons people don't want to get involved on the ground, but people can still be anonymous and contribute to local groups, whether they maintain a website for the group, whether they work behind the scenes, whether they're part of an advisory committee, whether they're giving other people advice. There are all sorts of talents, all sorts of skills that people can have that can contribute toward a good result. For instance, I worked with a person in my organization who was doing a lot of the technical stuff, who was heading up the website, who was doing recording of podcasts. And that was really helpful. There are some people in the organization who work with certain businesses. They know of donors who can contribute. So these are all well and good. Although the on-the-ground activism, to go back to that, I think is often more effective than just being on the internet. When you're on the ground, you interact with people in the community, you're face to face, and I think you're more likely to shift opinion, engage people, and be effective on the ground.
Yeah, I know that one of the things I do is I try to go to Christian Facebook pages and blogs, and I try to entice these people to call our show, to share their opinions with us, and get no response. And the internet seems to be like a really good place for disseminating information amongst people who agree with you. But the internet is not a place where public policy is made. It is made in our courtrooms, it's made in our city council meetings, our government buildings. It's made by people who are willing to show up and put their name with a vote. Though we have like secret ballot in this country, the real people who make change in this country are those that are willing to put their face out there and make policy choices and bank on that. And one of the things I want to talk about is the consequences of not doing that. We talked a little bit about, maybe someone's afraid to speak out. Are they ever going to be able to speak out if we get a Christian version of Sharia law in this country because not enough people got involved and made policy changes and made changes to the law? At that point, it's a little bit late. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how, does Justin Vacula, does your organization have like a starter kit for somebody who says, hey, I watched this guy's video where he was talking to the city council meeting. I want to do that in my community. Is there any like basic rules or suggestions that you have for somebody that's starting out or wants to start out or network, et cetera?
Right. I would just encourage people to find issues in their community that they can speak out against, address, maybe go to some events in the community. Again, there are different personalities, different approaches that one can take. I won't say that there's one perfect method to activism. This is how everyone should do it because, again, people have different talents and skills. Some people will be more confrontational, more diplomatic, more in between. They'll want to go to the Christian events. Some people actually aren't prepared to deal with the arguments in the conversation. They can't do it well. I've had some friends who've told me that they would just become angry and upset when dealing with some people saying things. For instance, when I protested the recent National Day of Prayer event, there were people who said things to me like, well, you're an atheist, so what reason do you have to wake up in the morning? Why would you do good to others? What reason do you have to be a moral person? I don't become upset about this. I don't get angry. I don't say to the other people, well, you just need to educate yourself. I don't make these comments to them. I don't dismiss them. I use this as an opportunity to have a discussion. And it is great actually going to Christian events and having discussions with people, I think is extremely effective. Of course, minds aren't going to change overnight, and I'm not going in with a goal goal to just deconvert all of these people. It's just extremely unrealistic. But what I do go in with a goal is to inform other people, to break down some stereotypes. There have been many religious people who've told me over the years, well, hey, I disagree with you on the God issue, but I agree with you on the church-state issue. Or, hey, I had thought that you were this really angry, nasty person, but after talking to you, I realized that's not the case, and that other atheists I know are nice, and I've never really met someone identifying as an atheist before. So these are some good outcomes of being on the ground that are you really won't get often when you're just online.
I think you make an excellent point. If nothing else, you put a human face on who you are, and you're an ambassador at that point for atheism, because these people are always having us defined for them by the worst possible elements out there. You know, it's like we eat babies, we drink blood, you know, we're satanic. And so it does sound like, you know, if someone really does care about this subject, that they really do need to step out into the real world. And, you know, one of the things I was thinking about is you and I talked a little bit earlier about on the internet, people feel they can say things that they would never say in person. And, you know, I've seen Christians and atheists get into these battles that degenerate very quickly on the internet, where if these two people were sitting in a room, or if they were like at some, you know, event on a courthouse lawn, you know, with a banner or something, they could engage in a dialogue that I would suggest is probably a lot more civilized. It seems to me that if you really, you know, care about this subject, you're probably, in my personal opinion, you're in less of a threat of alienating someone doing it face to face than you are behind a computer where they feel they can say whatever they want to with no consequence.
Right.
What have you run into as far as, okay, so we talked about the Christian and religious side. Have you run into atheists who basically have just said, I think you'd mentioned something to the fact like, dude, let bygones be bygones, man. You know, it's like these people want to go to church, let them go to church. I'm an atheist. I don't need to change anybody's minds. What's your take on that? What do you feel about that kind of thing?
Right. There's a lot of apathy amongst non-religious or atheist individuals, secular individuals who just kind of live life as if God doesn't exist. I guess all atheists will, but it's not so much of a big deal for them. They've never really felt that there's an urge to get out in the community. And some will make these things. Why can't you just live and let live? Why don't you just leave these people alone? Why can't we all just get along? What's the issue here? I don't really see a need to be active in the community. A lot of these people, I think, just want to get along. They don't want to stir the pot. Some people just aren't for that. They don't want to be out there in the community. That's a personality thing, but it's pretty weird when some people will try to dissuade me from activism and saying, well, actually, I don't think what you're doing is good. You should stop doing it. They maybe pretend to know all the answers, but yet they're not actually doing it in the community. So it's a really confusing mix. And if you're a non-religious individual, you think that you have the tools to get involved in activism, or you think you have the right answers, well, it's very easy for me to say, okay, well, show me how it's done. And I often don't hear back from these people. But people are going to have different goals, right? There are people who are passionate about all kinds of issues, and it's very easy for, say, someone who is involved with animal rights to say, oh, well, why aren't you involved, blah, blah, blah. It can be very easy to do that. Some people are passionate and some aren't, but don't knock people who are involved in something if you're personally not interested in it. I don't see that as being productive. We can have productive discussions about effective activism. What are some approaches you think that are good, and let's talk about that. Let's just not berate people because we disagree with their approaches. And there could be some conversations also about if you're just going to be outright antagonistic, if you're just going to outright ridicule people. If I put up a banner, for instance, that said all Christians are dumb, then like, okay, great, let's talk about that. I'm not going to put up a banner like that, and that might not be effective, right? But they're all different kinds of approaches. And again, I tend to take more of a middle the road approach. Some people will say, oh, you're too provocative, you're not provocative enough. Not everyone's going to be satisfied. So I say just do what works for you and what you can think of being effective.
That's fair. Have you had people reach out to you from the atheist community that want to get involved? I mean, are you inspiring people? What do you see as some measuring of success for Justin Vacula?
Right. It's sometimes difficult to measure success because you won't see changes in people all the time. Maybe one person will attend a debate, for instance, who is extremely religious, and they'll walk out of the debate questioning some of their ideas, modifying their beliefs, not necessarily just abandoning the belief in God or whatever other beliefs they hold as a result of being Christians or religious, whatever happens to be the case. But some will change, and some will say things like I mentioned earlier. Well, I thought that you were this nasty person and you're really not. I think that's a good change in people, right? You're not going to completely change people overnight. That shouldn't be the goal. You're going to fail if you're going to set that high, unreasonable goal. The change also happens too when you see conversations happening about the issues. When we have a debate or a discussion, we have 2 or more people on stage, and those people are going to walk away likely with the same ideas. But there are many people in the audience who hear the discussion. People have the conversations amongst each other. When newspaper articles come up or just things come up in the media, people have these discussions at work, at home. And it's good that people keep talking about the issues. Even as an atheist, when I came out, my approach in 2009 and my thoughts in 2009 are different today because I've had interaction with religious people and I get to know more about what they believe, what religion means to them. So I want to be confronting a reasonable form of Christianity, if you will. I'm not going to just think that every Christian believes the same thing, every Christian has the same priorities. So I get to know people, and I might be wrong about the atheism thing. Maybe a God does exist, right? So I expose myself to the ideas that Christians put forth. I welcome the discussion, and I'm open-minded. I'm willing to change any and all of my beliefs if there's good reason. So getting involved in these discussions is good for me too, and I see progress in other people when they have these discussions with me.
Fair enough. What type of responses have you gotten? I think I touched on this a little earlier from government officials. Have you ever been told not to come back to a meeting? Have you ever been threatened? Anyone follow up with an email or a phone call to you about questions or concerns you've had?
Right. One of the strangest things that happened throughout the activism career, if you will, was when a bus driver of a bus organization had posted messages like, "Don't you dare come on my bus, you're a puke and I don't want to see you," this and that. As I use this bus agency to get around to get to my classes. I'm in graduate school now. And there was this bus driver who was just making extremely antagonistic comments. So I reported these comments. There was actually a police report because this was really borderline threatening behavior. A county bus driver is refusing me service, and some of the comments were quite overboard. So I contacted the police. It got back to the employer, and the employer said that the bus driver would be disciplined for his remarks, and if I had any problems on the buses, that I should let him know. This followed an advertisement I submitted to a bus agency that had the word atheist on it that was refused. There was an uproar from some bus drivers and some people in the community when I proposed that advertisement. So that was one of the responses I received. There were also some religious individuals who I was attending college with when I was in my undergraduate studies who were making some threats. So I reported these to campus security. I documented them online. And I show people, I don't want to focus on this so much, but it's worth mentioning because I hear all sorts of people online, "Oh, I'm getting these threats, I'm being harassed, et cetera, et cetera." But there's often very little transparency, and I think that's a problem. So what I do is I put them online for people to see and make this known. There's transparency going on here, and I think it's important to point that out and to also have a good attitude about it. When you're a public figure, when you're talking about controversial issues, when you're challenging deeply held beliefs that people had, you're going to get some backlash very often. Although I think you can be proactive and mitigate that, but there will be some people out there who will be nasty. So the appropriate response to that is just keep doing what you're doing and have a positive attitude about it. There can be a time if you're too confrontational with people, if you're being disrespectful to people, well, then they might respond in kind. So I think it's important to be proactive, to be positive, to not let anger overrule you and be nasty toward other people.
Okay. And so I guess that leads me to a question of why do you do what you do? Why do you go to city council meetings? Have you seen someone before you do this and had it be effective? Is this, what drives you to take the avenues that you take?
Well, when I was attending undergraduate studies, I was taking philosophy classes and I had started to question my Christian belief. I went through Catholic education, throughout the confirmation, reconciliation, all the sacraments that I was able to get. I never really questioned my religious belief. I just took it as a given. I was just raised in the tradition and I just accepted it. That was just it. There was no questioning. But once I got into undergraduate studies and had some friends challenging my belief, I started to look into it. And I said, well, I think it really matters whether my beliefs are true. So I started to look into it, have conversations with theologians, ministers on campus, started to read secular atheist books. Richard Dawkins, for instance, The God Delusion was one of the first books that I had read. And little by little, the belief went away. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to continue talking about this. I saw this as an issue when I see all the harm that religion causes. And I experienced the harm with family members being particularly nasty toward me, sending these nasty messages, which I also made public. And when I first complained about a courthouse nativity display, that was a standalone display, very prominent on a corner, the display was taken down and I received a lot of backlash from members in the community. So I started with this position: religion is harmful, something needs to be done about this, someone needs to speak up about these issues. And then when all the harm comes in as a result of speaking about the issues, then it got personal. And I want to say, okay, well now clearly there's something to address. I want to keep addressing this. So that's really where it comes in there. Many people can be unaffected by the issues and they might think, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, it doesn't really affect me. But it's affecting a lot of people around the country who report violations like this, the negativity that people face from family members, from friends, from people in the community. It's a problem.
Yeah, it definitely makes one wonder if a God is this all-powerful deity, why he needs people to write nasty emails and make threats whenever someone questions his belief. It just is mind-boggling. It's like if I was truly a believer in Christianity, I'd be like, okay, you can believe whatever you want. God has an answer for you. I don't need to get worked up over it. But they don't. And I guess the fear is that when this stuff carries over into our politics, if these people are that angry with you over an email or over a blog post or contacting your government officials, it makes me wonder what will happen when they want to insert their type of beliefs in our legal system and in our laws, and it's quite frightening. One of the things I would let our viewers know is that I spoke to a gentleman today by the name of Chris Shelton, who is a former Scientologist. He was in their paramilitary organization, as a church really needs a paramilitary organization called the Sea Org. And a lot of people may not be aware of this, but there is a legal case going on right now in Texas where Scientology's legal defense to stalking, sending rubber sex toys, trying to get a woman fired, sat outside her and her husband's home for like 200 and some odd days, following them with a camera crew, trying to provoke them into fights, is that it's their religiously protected right, and our legislators and our courts have no jurisdiction over this because that's separation of church and state. And most people will look at that and go, that's insane. But that's only insane because they're not Scientologists. If you're a Christian and it's Christian values and your Christian church is telling you to do something, maybe you would think that they would start to see the importance of separation of church and state. And do you ever run into that, where you run into people who are kind of like blind to the bigger picture, but only can see things from, they would like totally agree with you? Oh yeah, that's insane. We can't have that in our legal system. But when it comes to their own religious beliefs, they're fully ready to project those into the community.
Right. Yes, I think there's some apathy amongst, like I said, non-religious individuals. They don't see what the harm is. Why is there a need to be active? So I think it's important to talk about examples, how people are harmed. And at the end of the day, we can't really doubt that our beliefs inform our actions, that if we're going to believe the society should be a certain way and people want to get involved in politics who think that, for instance, we should ban gay marriages, right? That we shouldn't allow that. That's one thing that's very highly religious motivated. A lot of money from religious organizations go into stopping gay marriage from happening. That's a problem, and many people realize that. Although some will want to try to get cozy with the Catholic Church and try to shift their opinion and have the church shift opinion on gay marriage, homosexuality, etc. There is improvement, though, I think, within churches that are being more inclusive of LGBT individuals. And that's all well and good, but we still can't deny that a lot of the opposition to gay marriage is religiously based. So that's just one instance. There are also in the state of Pennsylvania some other issues going on where religious daycares want exemptions from laws that govern daycares in Pennsylvania, child care laws. There are certain staff to student or staff to child ratios and some basic procedures for health, safety, evacuations that have to be followed. And some religious organizations want exemptions from this. And every so often we see these horrible stories of children who are just left in a car with windows up. They were just abandoned because they didn't have the proper supervision and they die. And there, of course, faith healing is an issue too. Here in Pennsylvania, there were some children who died because their parents did not want to give them medicine, that they would just pray. These are more extreme examples, of course, but there are still these local examples, like some that I get involved in, and the hatred I face from certain religious individuals. It's just a problem. If your religion is going to motivate you to be extremely nasty toward other people because they have a disagreement with you on a religious matter, or whether a God exists, how the government should be involved with religion, that's an extreme problem. So what I encourage people to do is have the discussions. Well, let's talk about that. When I'm at Christian events, I want to have the discussions with them. If people say, oh, well, I'm offended by what you're saying, okay, well, let's talk about that. So I think it's important to be really open and not isolate ourselves to echo chambers, only talking to people who agree with us. But in online spheres, I often see that happening to the extremes of some people even saying that certain things aren't up for debate and that they're not willing to change their mind on given issues. Well, I say, and it's important to say this to religious believers, that I'm willing to change my mind on any and all issues, given good reason, argument, and evidence. I think it's important to instill these values and to be open like that.
I totally agree. And it's one of those things, we're going to take a break here in a minute, but it's really interesting to see the dynamics when you're talking to someone who is an atheist. But I guess one of the things I want to revisit when we come back from our break is trying to get people who are theists to, maybe that's the door to get them to reconsider, which is, you can say, oh, hey, Scientology's kooky, or, oh, hey, female circumcision is wrong, but male circumcision is totally okay, because it's in my religious belief, and kind of get them to step back and look at things from, hey, if you aren't this religious belief, could you understand how somebody would have a problem with it? And when we come back from our break, I'd like to kind of discuss a little more about the impact of the Supreme Court decision and how we may be starting to see more quackery in our laws and city council meetings as a result of it.
So right now, scientists and engineers are working every day to help humans learn how to better care for our home so that we never have to leave. NASA has a fleet of satellites around the planet that keeps track of climate change and studies how humans are affecting the planet. NASA has a ton of geniuses, and all of them are working for a future that has a healthy Earth in it. Like when NASA helped find the hole in our ozone layer so we could fix it before the problem got out of control, NASA is doing its part. We have to do ours. This is our home. To learn more about how NASA is keeping an eye on Earth, visit www.nasa.gov/Earth.
When I was younger, I didn't want to admit I had a serious disease. Because of my diabetes, I lost the sight in my left eye. Misconceptions continue to surround this monster public health issue. But the simple truth is, diabetes can often be prevented and complications avoided. You're not alone. Understand the realities of diabetes and know that you can manage it and lead a full, active life.
There's an alarming trend in the world today. Everywhere you go, people are saying that cinema is dead. But cinema is not dead. My name is Count Simon Gauntley, and on my television program, Count Gauntley's Horrors from the Public Domain, I make it my mission to resurrect forgotten film classics. I promise to dredge the sewers and ford the stagnant streams of film history to ensure that no film is truly lost to the ages. Count Gauntley and FPA, keeping cinema alive! Alive! Alive!
Well, even though Joseph's been gone 18 months, we've made the decision to keep all his things as they were when he was here last. I finally just packed his toothbrush away like 6 months ago. It had been sitting on the counter in the bathroom. And I was cleaning the bathroom one day and I just thought, okay, it's time to put the toothbrush in the medicine cabinet.
This is your host, Paul Sheehan of Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century. And today we have on Justin Vacula, who is an activist who has been going to city council meetings in his city, and he is questioning the fact that the city council is leading prayer prior to opening their sessions. And we're talking about the importance today of average citizens getting involved and ensuring that there is a separation of church and state. Justin, can you tell us a little bit about why you have concerns, or what concerns you may have about the recent Supreme Court ruling and how that may wind up affecting the efforts that you've been working so hard on?
Right. When I objected to prayer at city council sessions, there were some responses from council members about how it's tradition, it's always been done this way, we'll have to get back to you on that. And they even mentioned the Supreme Court case, which was not decided at the time, of course. They had said, well, we'll see what the Supreme Court has to say, and then we'll research the issue. And now, since the Supreme Court is saying that, well, these prayers are okay as long as you go throughout the community, look for other people, there are some provisions in that decision, to my understanding, where they can't just pick people of one religious perspective, that they have to look through the community, that if people ask, that they will be given time. Although in Wilkes-Barre, it's a different situation because the prayer is government-led. It's the same prayer, it's the same councilwoman who gives the prayer during the meeting. The agenda is interesting because the meetings start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Immediately following the Pledge of Allegiance is the prayer. The prayer is not listed on the agenda, which I find a bit awkward. And they do it during the meeting. They're not doing it before the meeting. A lot of discussion, people say, oh, it's done before the meeting. Well, they're not. If they did it before the meeting, if they just did it privately in a room, as the Bible instructs them to do it, not out in public, then there wouldn't be a complaint. That's just something they could do on their own time. But when they're government officials, I think they should exclude prayer from meetings. One thing I had said also during my appeal is that they can include people from other religious perspectives. Perhaps when I go to the next city council meeting, I can say that I'd like to give a secular invocation during a meeting, and that we'll see what they have to say about that, because the Supreme Court decision says, to my understanding, that they have to look for people throughout the community of different perspectives, not just take people from one religious perspective. But what happens in many communities is that Christianity is the dominating religion. So where are these people from other religious perspectives? Are they coming to the meetings? Are they being invited? Is the city council really doing a job at finding people to give these invocations, prayers, introductions? The Freedom from Religion Foundation, for instance, is inviting secularists, agnostics, atheists to go to their council meetings and volunteer to give these prayers or invocations, whatever you want to call them. So that can be something that the Supreme Court decision actually compels city councils to do, to look for other people and not just have government-led prayer or the same prayer at every meeting.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I know, like, when there's a legal case, for instance, a judge has to recuse themselves if there's even the appearance of some type of prejudice or, and yet when we get to our government that makes the laws, these people can openly engage in what some people would consider prejudicial activity. For instance, if, let's say that I was I was Jewish or I was Hindu and I went to a city council meeting and I got this heavily Christian prayer, how is it expected that my concerns are going to be seen as their concerns? It's like I don't belong to that club. And, if you're going off with some, oh Lord, bless the city council meeting in our community. Well, wait a second, I'm a member of this community, but I don't believe in that God, so how am I going to be represented? Which I thought was the whole point of separation of church and state. And I'm wondering if you think you're going to see things getting better or worse, or whether you have an opinion on that now that the Supreme Court ruling is out.
Right. It's really hard to predict the future, right? But one thing that was brought up in one of your previous shows was what's often referred to as the Lemon test, that laws need to have a secular purpose, that they not be explicitly religious. That's my understanding of it. And with these prayers, if you're talking about Almighty Father in heaven and Jesus' death on the cross and the blood of Jesus, these are some common themes that are in Pennsylvania House of Representatives sessions, city council sessions. I don't really see what the secular purpose of that is. I suppose they can make the argument, and I think they did in the Supreme Court case, that this prayer has a uniting benefit. The people of the community are religious, and when the prayer happens, they're united.
It makes
in
you,
that.
Yeah,
Right.
makes you wonder how uniting it is when they get sued for it. I mean, it's like the lawsuit itself is an example that it's divisive, but somehow the Supreme Court sees this very differently. Apparently suing people now is a form of unity in this country. But it makes me wonder, and I'm just curious, and I don't know maybe if you were ever interested in bringing it up or if you have an opinion on it, but I would love to ask these people is, do you really believe by praying that God's going to fix the potholes in the community?
Oh, yes.
I mean,
yes, I actually did that when I addressed city council. I asked very specific questions. Why is it that the city council has these prayers at the meeting? Does city council believe that there's going to be a supernatural intervention, that God is going to intervene and fix governmental problems? I didn't receive an answer to any of these questions, of course, but I thought it was very interesting to ask, to see what the response would be. Why is it that you include? As I said, they said tradition was some part of it. Tradition was something to do with it. It was probably tradition is what they said. Looking at some notes here, but they don't really explain what is that going to do. Is God going to impart some knowledge upon city council members? They're calling on a supernatural benefit to happen. It's usually what people talk about when they talk about prayer. They're calling on God to bless the meetings, to impart knowledge upon people. So it's explicit in what they're saying, but these meetings are not religious meetings. If you want to have a church service and say that, then fine, so be it, but just don't do it on government time. It's all we're asking. They talk about these prayers being united or uniting, but they're often exclusionary. Why are you talking about Judeo-Christian prayers in a meeting room where people of all different religious beliefs, including people with no religious beliefs, are coming to the meeting to raise their concerns at these council meetings? It's really strange to me.
Yeah. Well, the thing I would remind people who want to, have a history of beating their wives and want to own another human being or gay bash is there's hope for you. The Supreme Court has said if you can show it's tradition, you might actually have some leeway with that.
Yeah, a really bad argument, because in Pennsylvania, a big tradition was coal mining industry employing what were called breaker boys, boys before their teenage years and even in their teenage years, where they would be working in extremely hazardous conditions, losing arms, thumbs, other fingers, terrible working conditions. But this went on for quite a while, and people could say, oh, well, it's tradition that we have these breaker boys, and it's okay if boys are harmed. It's fine if we do that. Obviously, it's a little bit different because we're talking about limbs and fingers and human rights versus the prayer. There's some harm, I would argue, with the prayer. In the case of slavery or breaker boys, there's more harm there, but there's still a lot of the same reasoning going on isn't good enough to back up an argument.
Yeah, and then it's also something to be said for, that prayer is often a precursor to action. When people's prayers aren't answered, or they feel, most people will pray, but they also act too. It's like, oh Lord, forgive these heathens for gay marriage, but then they're going to get up and go and vote against gay marriage. They're going to get up and write something nasty on the internet, and hopefully they don't get up and attack somebody. But it is strange that this is allowed to still go on in our court. I mean, in our country, in our city council meetings. We only have about a minute and a half left, Justin, and I want you to take a moment. I want you to talk about the type of support you get from people in the community, groups and individuals, and what people can do if they want to support the work you're doing.
Right. So it's easy to dwell on the negative and talk about opposition from government, people in the community being nasty, but I think there's a lot of hope. There's change that is happening. It's gradual. It's sometimes difficult to measure, but there is progress. The community, I think, despite some negativity and some drama that pops up in the atheist community every so often, is strong. There are some great organizations like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, for instance, that is really on the forefront of these issues, challenging these violations, working with citizens. So there is hope in that. The community is strong. There are many doing great things. It's easy to focus on the negatives, as I said, but there are positives. There is some progress. It's not all going to happen. So I encourage you to go out in your community, or if you want to remain anonymous, work behind the scenes, work with others who will go out there, and you can make a change.
And I would encourage anyone watching this show that wants to do that to reach out to Justin. He's got the experience. If you have, maybe he has some advice for you, reach out to us. We would love to know and report on your success in your local community about your actions. And Justin, I want to thank you for coming on Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century. I know we'll have you on again at some point. We will be following up on your answers with your Freedom of Information request through your state. Thank you again for coming on. Ladies and gentlemen, stick around. Or keep tuning back in. We're going to have this guy, Chris Shelton, on. We're going to have a new young, enthused atheist member coming on as a co-host. So we'll see you next week. And until then, as Rick Wingrove would say, make sure to read your Bible, because nothing will deconvert you faster. And have a good one. And enjoy the weekend. The weather's wonderful. Adios.